This film is a fictionalized account of events taking place between 2001 and 2029. This is a work of fiction. Names, characters, businesses, places, events, locales, and incidents are either the products of the author's imagination or used in a fictitious manner. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. In 2020, a virus named SARS-19 spreads rapidly across the world, disrupting lives, economies, and eventually governments. In its aftermath, the world sinks into a deep and severe economic depression, unparalleled in all of modern history. The worst, however, is yet to come. On April 3rd, 2022, a wave of unexplained deaths hits New York City. Over 300,000 people die in less than 24 hours. Only a week later, on April 10th, the CDC announces a new mutation of the virus named SARS-22. The new virus activates latent SARS-19 infections in the spinal fluid of recovered and previously asymptomatic patients, causing paralysis, strokes, heart attacks, and in the majority of cases, instant death. Over 600 million people die between June and August. A vaccine is developed in December 2022, but is not widely available for another 6 months. By August 2023, SARS-22 has claimed the lives of over 1.5 billion people. The SARS pandemic, however, is far from over. In January 2024, NATO, Russian, and Chinese troops returning home from the Middle East begin dying en masse, despite having received vaccinations to SARS-22. The new virus is identified as SARS-24. In the majority of cases, patients die suddenly after being asymptomatic carriers for several weeks. 2 billion lives are lost to SARS-24 in 2024. The final case of SARS-24 is recorded on October 1st, 2027. The total worldwide death toll from the SARS viruses stands at over 4 billion. The following is a documentary presentation of those that have survived the SARS pandemics. These are their stories, recorded during 2029.
My name is Nancy Adams. I'm 35, and I was a nurse during the 2019 and 2022 pandemics. I haven't worked since 2023. Well, not since the hospitals shut down and never reopened.
What was it like during both pandemics at the hospitals you worked at?
The pandemic in 2020, in retrospect, was far worse because that's when everything changed. We didn't have any warning, really. You would see horror stories on the news, but they were always somewhere else, far away, not right here, right now. Not until March of that year when the lockdowns began.
How did the lockdowns differ between those two pandemics?
The lockdowns never really ended. I mean, the official lockdowns ended before the 22 pandemic, and some people tried to go back to some sort of normal, but it was almost impossible.
Because people were sick?
No, because people were afraid. I think that was the real disease back then. People stopped going out. They started hoarding and stopped shopping, and stores began to close. Not because of the lockdown, but because they had no customers. That wasn't normal. However, at work, there was always some sort of normality being around people dying every day. As crazy as that sounds. But I felt the most normal working at that hospital during the first pandemic. I became used to seeing crowds of people in the hallway unattended and dying on the floor. Dying because doctors were busy or they didn't have anything to help them. And that became normal because that was what I expected to see. But when the grocery stores began running out of almost everything, and it was becoming impossible to find a deodorant stick, and people were walking around smelling of bad body odor, or when the vivid dreams started of eating a fresh tomato, or even driving to work on the highway and seeing abandoned cars everywhere. That was when I realized that things had changed and they were never going to go back to the way they were.
And what about the pandemic in 2022? More people died in that pandemic. Some say close to 2 billion worldwide. How was that less horrifying than the 2020 pandemic?
The SARS-22 pandemic wasn't less horrifying, but it was different. The hospitals at that time were more quiet, and people were afraid to go to the hospital. And I remember sitting in my hazmat suit and waiting, and no one was coming in the ER, and I was just watching the news, reporting how bad everything was getting worldwide.
Why were all the hospitals so empty? Was it because people were afraid of contracting SARS-22 at the hospital, or because of something else?
Everyone was afraid of contracting SARS-22, not just at the hospitals, but everywhere, outside one's home, their car, and that wasn't why the hospitals were vacant. It was because SARS-22 was so lethal, quick. The people simply died from being at home or at work or driving without any warning.
Were you ever tasked with helping dispose of the bodies of those that didn't make it to the hospitals?
No. I was one of the fortunate ones and was never asked to help the National Guard with collecting the bodies from homes. But I did have to help transport body bags to the hospital morgue, as we had an incinerator in the hospital basement. I remember one week we received so many body bags that we just had to leave them in the parking lot. And the smell, that is a smell that you never forget. You carry it with you and you want to forget it, but you can't. Just the other day, I thought of that smell in the shower, and moments later, I was vomiting. It's been years, but that smell will never leave me. Not as long as I live.
How many body bags were there in the hospital parking lot?
A lot. And always more than we were equipped to handle. We received tens of thousands of body bags one day, yet our staff and incinerator can only cremate a fraction of that at most in a given day.
How long did it take you to clear those up?
We never did. There were just too many body bags, and more would show up every day. Eventually, the National Guard burned the bodies in the parking lot. Once we reached about 100,000, they decided to just douse the entire heap of bodies with petrol shot out of fire trucks. I remember standing there in my hazmat suit with a doctor and watching from a window, and felt relief watching those bodies burn.
Relief that the bodies were being taken care of?
No. Relief to no longer have the smell of the dead.
Our next interview takes us to the state of Michigan to speak with Peter Jensen. Hi, Peter. How exactly did you come to take part in the food riots?
It was after my wife and children died from SARS-22. They died within days from each other.
I'm sorry. How were you able to move forward from that?
I didn't move forward from that. I did do what I had to do. I gave them a proper burial in the backyard. And then I just waited for it.
Waited for what?
SARS-22. I knew it was coming for me, just waiting for the right moment to get me. Back then, I believed I would just die. I started waking up every morning, taking in every sunrise, like it was the last I'd ever see. Everything felt temporary. Every sound, every scent, every breath. I figured I'd had no warning like Liz or the kids. I'd just kneel over, fall down, and die. But those days turned into weeks. Those weeks turned into months, and I was still alive. I guess if you spend all your time just sitting around waiting to die, there eventually comes a point when you realize you can't just live your life in fear. You can't just be afraid of death all the time. You have to go out and live while you can, while you still have time. Other things can kill you too, like depression or inaction.
Why do you think you were able to survive the pandemics?
For whatever reasons, due to the grace of God. I was spared from the pandemics. A friend of mine brought me to the city for the first food riots. He told me, unless we stand up and fight, we're not going to get a damn thing. I learned from him about how the banks had been holding the food supply of that year's harvest, almost all of the farming capacity of the United States, hoping to export it to other countries to make a profit. And that our government was somehow perfectly okay with letting them do it, while people here were starving to death. At least SARS-22 would hit you fast. But hunger? Real hunger? There's no worse way to die than that.
Most nursing homes were abandoned during the second pandemic due to a lack of staffing, and family members picked up their loved ones to care for them at home. But not every senior had a family to go home to. Our next interview takes us to the only remaining nursing home in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, to speak with Helen Sharp, once a resident and now the manager of the facility that looks after those left at her door. Hi, Helen. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got started in your role?
Hi. That was back in 2022. I was a resident at this facility at the time. But by the second pandemic, no one came to check on us. And the last staff member to do so had died, along with the majority of the residents. There were only a few of us left. But we decided that we weren't going to wait around for help. We buried the dead. We cleaned the place up. We took stock of the supplies. One of the residents even went out for seed. We were never really afraid of SARS. Most of us were comfortable with the thought of dying. However, for some reason, we only had what felt like a minor cold. And afterward, the physical ailments that we were suffering from miraculously went away. Most of us feel 10 to 20 years younger since we came down with SARS. So we decided to keep the facility open and look after anyone that needed our help.
Who comes to you for help these days?
Mainly abandoned grandparents, sons or daughters, too tired to take care of someone with Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, or just tired of living with them. We'll drive here just to get rid of them. Often, they'll leave them on our front doorstep, wearing adult diapers. We never see the children, just the abandoned ones, who are often crying when we open the door.
What happens then?
We take them in. We care for them. In many cases, we console them, since they've been abandoned by loved ones. I just don't understand this new generation, really. It's just, for my generation and my parents, we weren't so selfish. We put our families first. Too many people these days, they're ready to run from the slightest problems and shut out anyone that they don't agree with. If you ask me, some of the wrong people died from SARS.
How do you console these people left at your door to die?
I let them talk. You'd be amazed at how many of them went years without anyone wanting to listen to them. They often come to our facility confused, helpless, scared. But within a month, even if they're waiting for death the next day, there's that look in their eye that they are now content and they belong somewhere. They found a new family here and they're happy. For me personally, I don't think anyone should die without feeling that.